What's up, Meta Nerds, and welcome back to part 2 of the complete breakdown of the Supremacy. Let's go ahead and jump right into it as we were making our way towards the center of this ship. These large golden domes were actually the coolant silos, with these pipes making sure that the rest of the ship didn't overheat. Because this ship is half the size of London, there was a complicated system of transportation, and if we look really close, we can see part of the roads and tram system that was used to get around. This is what's referred to as the sustenance production plant. Because as we know, both stormtroopers and First Order troopers didn't have the most tasty diets. These were its enormous hyperdrive generators, positioned right next to a series of fusion reactors, with these reactant silos being right in front of a droid tram, which would transport raw materials, supplies, and other consumables on an automated system across the ship. The Supremacy had so many raw materials because they actually produced ships and vehicles on board. And the Supremacy has both the destruction power of an entire fleet, but also the industrial capability of a whole planet. This whole section was dedicated to the manufacturing of ground vehicles, and we'll see other manufacturing sections once we get towards the opposite wing. Towards the rear of the ship was the detention block, interrogation room, and we can actually see that laundry room number 346, which we saw in The Last Jedi, was located right here. The overbridge, like the name suggests, was at the very top of the ship, with Snoke's throne room being up here, with the commons area in between, followed by the hyperspace tracking complex. The Supremacy's hyperspace tracking capabilities are the most sophisticated in the entire galaxy. Technological advances were refined by the First Order, but were actually developed under the Tarkin Initiative, with all of the theoretical groundwork being done by the Empire, and actually stored upon the Citadel on the planet Scarif. The First Order was able to make this technology a reality, and the way it worked is that it actually had massive computer arrays, which were able to cross-reference the point at which the enemy ship jumped. Combine that with data from millennia of space combat and astrological information, predicting the location in space that the target was most likely to re-emerge in. But perhaps most important of all, is that this tracking equipment was technically located inside of hyperspace. A small hyperspace bubble was created around the tracking equipment, and so I think the reason behind its success is that they weren't tracking a ship from one plane of existence to another, but were able to cross-reference the point in real space and then start also tracking it through hyperspace. The Supremacy had 32 engines in total, and for once, we actually see several maneuvering thrusters that seem to fire upward, allowing the ship to change direction downward, and presumably, there were many maneuvering thrusters all across the Supremacy. And very interestingly, the sublight engine array that it uses improves upon the system used in the Death Star. Right underneath Snoke's throne room was this enormous assembly hall, which had seating for over 200,000. Moving forward, we see that the city blocks contain a majority of the crew's quarters. And moving across, we can see one of several droid repair shops, which was located right next to the starfighter assembly line. And below this was the Durasteel Foundry, which was one of 8 foundries across the ship. Like we said, this was a giant manufacturing plant as well, and in this room we could see where they took in asteroids, harvested all kinds of raw materials, and made things like Durasteel on site. Right behind here was the Star Destroyer construction and maintenance facility, and you can see just how small it makes the Resurgent class Star Destroyer look. On the underside of this ship were enormous Hangar Bay Doors, and this whole section off to the right was responsible for producing all kinds of components used within those capital ships. And continuing across, we see even more droid manufacturing plants, and this long stretch of a medical center, useful for taking care of that enormous crew. These large rooms are shown empty, but each one could carry 36,000 stormtroopers and acted as a staging area from which the First Order would launch attacks. Stormtrooper cadets could actually be trained on the Supremacy, and it's very reasonable to expect that many stormtroopers in the First Order would have spent their entire life upon this ship. And surprisingly, we don't have an exact number for how many weapons it had, but it was said to have thousands of heavy turbolasers, anti-ship missile batteries, heavy ion cannons, and tractor beam projectors. And if we look really close, we can see a few of the deflector shield projectors, just a couple of the many that were spread across the whole of this ship. And that concludes our tour, so that's it for the Supremacy. And the only cool thing I want to point out is that the way that this giant ship can float around the galaxy mining raw materials and pumping out an entire fleet of ships and vehicles is kind of like the more toned down and realistic version of the Starforge. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want to check out our social media, or ways that you can help support this channel, be sure to check out the description down below. If you want to see more, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so that you get notifications. But more important than all that, remember, Despite its demise, this ship is pretty amazing, and the Force will be with you, always.